You got something for me.
Sorry.
You got love, but confess.
Welcome, everybody. We'll just give you a minute of Maddie's pick of a musical interlude before we get started. Settle in, grab some water. It's going to be a spicy conversation today. I can feel it. Welcome, everybody.
One of these days, these boots are gonna walk all over you.
A classic. Thanks for joining, everyone. We'll just give everyone a few more seconds to join us for this LinkedIn Live today. Thanks for joining.
You keep lying when you ought to be truthing. And you keep losing.
Thanks, everyone, for joining. Again, just give it a few more seconds while we wait for people to join us live.
When you ought to be changing.
Great.
Now what's right is right, but you ain't been right.
A beautiful fade out. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome. We're here in Kiln in Park City, Utah. So excited that you're joining us for the third session of a 4-part series we're doing during Financial Literacy Month. This one on money plus divorce. We have one more next week, a really amazing topic as well, money plus fertility. We will post that this same time next week on LinkedIn Live. So please join for that. So welcome for this conversation. Just an invitation. If you have not already subscribed to the She Money newsletter, please do so. Share this with your friends. If you're joining us on replay, thank you as well. Please post comments in the chat, questions. I have a whole team of people here during this call today helping to bring your voices into this session today with Jill Coil. So before I introduce Jill, let me just say a little bit about this topic. Money plus divorce. I think it would be fair to say that no one enters marriage thinking they're going to get divorced. And yet we're going to hear a lot about some statistics today, but approximately 50% of marriages end in divorce. Obviously, the implications of that at a personal level, in relationships with children, families, finances, are probably one of the most significant life events that can happen, and it's happening to a large percentage of people. So we're excited to have this conversation with an expert in the field and really bring in, because we're She Money, talk about money when it comes from divorce. But we're also going to pull the lens back because money is, to use a term or context that Brene Brown often gives, where money starts and emotions end. They're all just connected. So know that we're going to have an amazing conversation today and invite you to, again, to settle in, and we invite your questions. So let me introduce you to our guest speaker today. I'm going to read her bio because it's really pretty kick-ass, if I say so myself. I'm excited that Jill Coil is born and raised in Utah. And even as a young girl, Jill knew she wanted to be an attorney in order to fight for the rights of others. Her passion drove her to Brigham Young University, and of course, she graduated with honors. After completing her undergrad in political science, Jill moved to Texas, where she received her JD from Texas Southern University. To this day, Jill is licensed in both Texas and Utah. Since graduating from college, she has continued to reach for new opportunities. She founded Coil Law, Utah's #1 family law firm. In 2020, she founded the first female-led personal injury firm, Moxie Law Group. And in 2023, she launched her online divorce platform, Simple Ending. She's also an accomplished writer and author. I'm going to be talking a lot about her book today, No One Dies from Divorce, a guide to helping people through the divorce process, and it was published in 2021. She's also very active in her community, both here and in Texas. She has awards and accolades for her hard work and fierce determination. And listen to this, Moxie Law Group was named one of the 100 companies of women championing women. So it's with that. And oh, by the way, she has 4 kids and she's married. And one of her favorite places to go is Disney World, which is mine too, or at least when my kids were young. So please welcome to the She Money stage. I guess that's what we're calling it, Jill Coil. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, guys. Thank you for
Hi,
having
Jill.
me.
Well, thank you so much. Obviously, this is a big topic, and where I really want to start, of course, I just read your bio, which is so incredible and so aligned with everything we're doing here at She Money. But I just would like to, for you to share a little bit about yourself. What I know from our pre-interview, you were destined to become a lawyer, and I love that you're wearing your pink jacket today. That's fantastic. I don't know if that was on Barbie lawyer theme, but I'm celebrating that. But share a little bit about your background and what brought you, really here today.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I always wanted to be a lawyer. I knew that. So since I was young, I did and got many opportunities to be able to get basically straight into that career. And, through it, it was quickly realized there was going to be some obstacles in it, not just because it's hard to become a lawyer, but also because of being a woman in a very male dominated field. So I did law school and my career a little bit backwards. Most people, want to go to a prestigious law school and get into the biggest prestigious law firm they can. I didn't do that. I went to a law school that I wanted to ensure that I didn't come out with tons of student loans. So I didn't go to a top law school. I came out of law school working for a very small boutique law firm, but I was able to work myself up until I got a job at one of the largest law firms in Utah. And then I realized very quickly, being in a large law firm, being one of 8 women attorneys in one of the largest law firms in the state, that I was never going to be able to shine as a woman, as a divorce attorney. And so I decided to leave the firm and start my own firm. And I was 6 months pregnant at the time, and I was super scared. But one of the things I knew about me is who I was, and I knew that I was a good attorney, and CoilLaw was born. And now I look at myself not just as an attorney, but I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm continually looking for ways to improve and to highlight females in this space, because we are very important in the legal world. And so I'm really proud of what I'm building and what I've created to be able to do that. So.
Well, thanks for sharing that, Joe. And I just want to spend another minute on I know you're still very engaged with the legal community and with women lawyers here in Utah and outside of it. And I have to say, I'm still hearing a lot of not great stories about how firms, given the percentage of women now that have law degrees, but they're not staying in their careers. In your case, you opted to start your own firm. Just love a little of your perspective on sort of what it's like in a lot of law firms, and is it continuing to drive women out now 10 years after you started your own firm?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the legal profession is still way behind when it comes to the glass ceiling and the ability for you to be able to be a woman and flourish in the field. A lot of that is because the legal profession is rated in billable hours. How much can you bill? And because of that, it has created, I think, a unfair advantage to a man who doesn't have or who has a family, but maybe has a wife that's able to support more of the household, whereas a woman in the field is expected to do the exact same and then go home and take care of their children and stuff. So that's what I did with CoilLaw. Like, if you're a woman at my firm, we're going to create your career to be able to do it all. And it's going to work for you and your family. And we are going to support you in doing that. I think people like me, there's other women that are doing this in the field as well, are basically demanding the breakthrough and demanding the door to be knocked down to give these opportunities. But it's going to take more women like me to stand up and say no more. We need change. So.
Well, and creating what you wanted to exist in the world. I feel like that's, as an entrepreneur now myself, I'm starting to use that language to build what you want to see in the world and show that things can be done differently. And I just celebrate
Absolutely.
that. Yeah. And obviously you chose, and we're going to get into it soon, to practice family law. So just describe that as a category. Of course, divorce is a component of it, but when you say family law, what does that encompass?
Yeah, so I mean, primarily we do divorce, but that could encompass, modifications. So after you get divorced and needing to make changes, we also do paternity actions, which means you're not married, but you have children together. We do a lot of juvenile work, DCFS work. So if DCFS has come to your house and are investigating you, we can help with that. We do guardian ad litem work, which means that we represent children in actions where their parents just can't get along or there's been allegations of abuse. So it basically encompasses the family, but it's not necessarily just divorce.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And of course, divorce is the main topic for today. And as I said in the opening, we are She Money. So whenever I can, this open invitation to add a financial lens to the discussion. And obviously it's a big component and a big factor when it comes to divorce. So just to start that conversation, and I just want to lift up your book again, and I'm going to be pulling from this book because I just want to say it's so accessible and practical and personal. And each chapter, and you have some spicy titles, which I want to pull into, is are stories from your clients. And I think bringing those into your book to kind of anchor the wisdom that you are sharing and the advice that you are giving is just so powerful. I mean, stories obviously help, land it for folks that might be going through some of the things that many of your clients have done. And speaking of stories, you have bravely shared your own story about almost getting divorced. And that's such a brave thing to do, and just want to honor and celebrate that. And you mentioned how it's made you a better lawyer, but maybe talk about that a little bit. And you've been practicing for a while before that happened for you, but how you're bringing your whole self to this work and your vulnerability around sharing your own personal story.
Yeah. There's two types of divorce attorneys out there. The ones that do it because they think they can make money at it, and then the ones that want to do it. I realized quickly that I wanted to do this because I am helping people through one of the hardest transitions of their life. I mean, divorce is likened unto death. You have to grieve it just like as if you were to lose somebody. And I realized that I had those skills of empathy and understanding to help, encourage and help people understand that divorce doesn't need to be the end. It could be the platform to something beautiful. And in my own story, it was so humbling for me to have been a divorce attorney for, a few years, and then to go through this process of my husband leaving and saying, I'm done, I want a divorce. And me ultimately going to this place of anger, of wanting to use the kids as something to hurt him, because how dare he want to leave me. And I remember those feelings, and I write about it in my book, and I talk about it. Me and my husband have a podcast on it. And so you get kind of his side of the story as well. But but I remember, we ultimately ended up getting back together and did a lot of counseling to be able to get to where we are. We're now going to be celebrating 18 years this year. But I am grateful I had that experience. Not that it was easy, but because it really got me to step back and realize I did the number one thing that you should not do in a divorce. And so now I feel like I can take my experience and my personal feelings of that, and I really can help my clients understand that that shouldn't be the focus of divorce. The focus of divorce should be, what can we do to protect yourself, your future, and your family? And it's just like added that extra level of helping people understand that we can get through this. And we don't need to use the children as weapons. We can use them as, to protect them, to protect yourself, and to do what we can for you and your family. And I think it just adds that level of being able to advocate correctly and appropriately for each situation.
Yeah. So, and thank you for sharing that. I think it's the same, I would say even in the money and finance space, often the people who practice it or who preach it or teach it as professionally or, have a lot of things that might be in the closet with respect to their own financial behaviors and just normalizing this, especially when, and I'd love to jump into a little of the statistics before we start harvesting some of the wisdom. But I guess I knew that 50% of more marriages end in divorce. I think that's over obviously the course of that marriage. But numbers have been coming down a little. I also read, I think you shared this, that 65 to 70% of divorces are initiated by women. But I know you know so many facts, but I think it's important to share them because of how common it is, right? So this is something that either we're going to experience or someone we know and someone we know, half of people we know that are married might experience. So share a little about the statistics and what you're sort of seeing in these trends related to divorce.
Yeah. The first thing I want to say is that's why we need to stop using divorce as a shameful word.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I'm divorced. I'm embarrassed. I don't want to talk about it. And I'm like, no, we're going to talk about it because if 50% of the population are getting divorced, if we use it as a movement instead of this shameful word, and we use it as teaching and an ability for people to have these platforms become the best version of themselves, we are creating something amazing. And that's a lot of people out there that are working on themselves to get better. And then we're going to be able to move forward. It's going to help you become a better friend, a better, father, mother. It's going to help you become better in your future relationships, whether it's with your employer or your employees. It can be used as this ability to step back and say, what can I do? What do I need to become a better person? So let's make it a movement instead of this like shameful word. But we do know that 50% of all marriages are getting divorced. That's just the statistics. And it went up, significantly since the 60s, but there's a lot of reasons for that. In the 60s, you had one income homes. And if you were in a bad marriage, a woman leaving that marriage was absolutely hard because they had no work experience. Most of them didn't have education. So taking care of the family was going to be impossible. So you had people that were just staying in these bad marriages. Now, the statistics show that we have more two-party income homes and more of if one party has an education, the other party has an education as well. That makes it easier to go into the workforce. So we're seeing that there is a much more ability for people to be able to get divorced and support themselves outside the marriage. Because of that, people are being empowered to leave bad situations. And I'll be the first one to tell you, I don't believe in soulmates. I believe that there are really good comparable people that work very well together. I believe that human communication is the key to being able to make any marriage work. But I believe that there are people that are not compatible and should not be in marriages. And so marriages in the end, sometimes you're never going to know if it's a bad marriage until you're in it and seeing it and the best thing you can do is recognize that a failed marriage is not meaning that you're failed. You didn't fail. Yeah. And it's okay. I'm going to be the first one to support, trying, working on yourself, working with a marriage counselor about communication. We talk about Brene Brown. Read all of her books if you're struggling in your marriage.
Yes. Watch her videos. Yeah. Her series, do everything. Brene Brown. Yes.
Brene Brown is the reason my husband and I are still together. When she talks about vulnerability, I mean, it's like paint on my face. And her book, Braving the Wilderness, when she talks about the stories we tell each other, tell ourselves, and the other person's not even thinking that, that is my husband and I. Like, when I say something, he internalizes it and is telling a story in his self. Same with me. And so we've really had to learn how to step back and say, what story did you think that I just said? And same. And so we've really had to evaluate how we communicate with each other. So sorry, that was a really long answer, but
No, that
so
was
much we can talk about this.
yeah. Well, and to your point, I feel like talking about divorce, it's what went wrong and how to get through is also, and maybe not the conversation we have today, but obviously you have insights how to avoid divorce. Like, what are the, because you see people coming in, and that's sort of a question I have about people coming into the process. And I've read your book where I hear so many stories, and in this idea that it comes as a surprise. So the more we know what communication, know about ourselves, the more we are able to communicate our needs and wants, the more we're aware of the stories we're telling ourselves, we show up for vulnerability, the higher the chance people are not going to land in your office, correct?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Exactly.
So
And
I'm sorry.
oh, I was just going to say, and the people that even if your marriage is ending, learning to be able to communicate properly is going to help after the divorce as well. Because if you have children together, communication is key. And if you're just telling yourself that it's their fault, that they're never going to be this person, or I'm never going to be able to communicate them with, appropriately after the divorce, and you have kids together, it's going to be nearly impossible as well. So communication is key. Like, I will teach everybody that communication, crucial conversations is one of my favorite all-time courses. I make all my employees do it, but I'm telling you, it will help you in every relationship you have.
Absolutely. Well, and that gets into this question of sort of why people get divorced. And I have the list that was in your book. We have some data that we pulled as well. So, obviously, a lot of reasons. I'd love your take on it. And especially, I think what showed up for us in the conversation was the role that money plays in some of the reasons why people end up getting divorced. It's both a
Yeah.
symptom and a cause, I think. It's both.
Yeah. I mean, I just out of my own statistics that I've taken from the thousands of intakes that I've done since I started, my career, is that the number one commonality I see is separate finances. And I love when I post a video about this because, man, you get those people that want to defend it like crazy. And in my mind, I think, yeah, it's fine. You'll be in my office in a couple of years.
Yeah.
A lot of people think that's like separate finances mean you have separate bank accounts. You don't, but if you look at money in a marriage as my money, your money, that's wrong. Like,
Yeah.
you're supposed to be a team, right? And if your husband, who historically men make more money than women, so until we get to equality on the wage gap here, why in any scenario is it going to be fair that the man gets to spend his money and then the woman gets to spend her money? It's very rare that you have two very, very high powered, incomes in a home where they're equally making about the same money. It doesn't even work. I mean, I do a lot of physician divorces because my husband's in that field, and I get a lot of referrals that way. And even two physicians, a lot of time the woman is working at 50% or 75% because they have kids and they need somebody to be a little bit more available. So people are like, oh, we should have separate finances and it just makes things easy. And I'm like, no. The only reason why you should ever have a separate bank account, in my opinion, is if there's like, if it's a second marriage, the other spouse has maybe child support obligations or judgments or liens, or they're coming in from a bankruptcy, that could be a reason. But you should be like doing an app, like where you're both on all of the accounts. You see where your money's going. You should be having quarterly or monthly meetings about what your finance goals are. And I'm telling you, just because the man works and the mom stays at home, if you don't have like a retirement plan for that mom, something's wrong. Because that mom, I'm telling you, is very, very important and worth a lot of money. And if you don't believe me, I can share stories personally of, these women that get cancer and end up passing away. And now you have a father who's, got 3 young kids, and they had no financial literacy or help for that woman. And he's left having to work because that's what he did, and then have to historically take care of these children, which was not historical what they did in the marriage. A lot of problems come from that.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I read that in your book and I'm like, uh-oh, because I actually come from a marriage where we have almost everything separate. But they're separate, but we know everything. We make decisions together. There's full transparency. There's not necessarily a my money and your money and we're doing it because I'm not a citizen of the US. So that's a primary motivator. But I think there could be, and I would maybe challenge around this separate bank account in your own name, especially, I feel very attached to that idea. But we're talking about full transparency, that you're not hiding assets, that you're not saying, the woman, and I heard this, believe it or not, many, many years ago when I lived in New Canaan, Connecticut, and I used to have these salons, and I had this woman, Jolene Godfrey, who wrote this exceptional book called Raising Financially Fit Kids. And I hosted salons around money. And the number of women that were on not even budgets, but used the term allowance to manage their household. And I was like, say what? Grown women on allowances. And somehow it just happened. And I think this gets into some of the reasons why maybe divorces happen, about how people value themselves and their own contributions in relationships. And money becomes a mirror of that. And then there's a lot of control that can, excuse me, also happen with money. So, in that context, I'd love your sense of what does really go wrong. So you're saying one thing that can go wrong around money that might contribute or lead to divorce is this idea of separateness, a lack of transparency, not a feeling that you're a team when it comes to your finances. And I'm curious to unpack that a little bit more in terms of some of the insights that you've been able to pull away from seeing so many marriages that end up in divorces as it relates to money.
Right. And I love that you use that word transparency, because that's exactly what I mean. Like, you don't necessarily have to have everything commingled, but you need to have full transparency. Like, there needs to be a spreadsheet on on that you guys share, a Google Doc or something that has all of your accounts and is updated regularly, so that you guys can see exactly what you're doing. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have joint accounts. Now, an allowance sometimes in a marriage makes sense if you have a spouse that just spends money and is irresponsible with money. But there are things you should be doing to become financial literate. Like, take a class, like go to a finance class together, go through, do things together to gain financial literacy. And sometimes there's women that are just like, I just didn't want to do it. Or he took it over and he was very controlling over it. And I get those women in my office, and then they don't know anything about their finances. And we're left to hope that the spouse is truthful. Yeah. And, Bitcoin was our first wide awakening, where, you could have an offshore account and buy Bitcoin, and good luck subpoenaing those documents. So you just be aware. If you're married right now and you don't know where your husband's or your paycheck's going and being divided, and how much is being entered into your 401k, and go learn. It's important for you to know that, so that you have some say in your future, of what it looks like when you guys want to retire, or if you end up divorcing, heavenly day, what is going to be coming to yours. So it's just important to be aware. And there are red flags. Financial abuse is a big deal, and it happens all the time. But guess what? The courts don't really care about it. If you've been financially abused in your marriage, it's such a red flag. And you need to be consistently talking about that, saying it's not okay, that you want access to the accounts, that you want to sit down with a financial planner or with your spouse and talk about this stuff. And if they refuse, red flag, red flag, red flag, red flag.
Well, and I love how you talk in your book about red flags, and even how you pull it back to dating red flags as a mom with younger kids that are in that space. And I think that's the language they start to use more, but it sort of pulls it back. If you want to avoid ever being in a situation where you're divorced and married to someone where there are a bunch of red flags, is know what those red flags are when you're in that courtship process and you're starting to head towards marriage. And we're finding people just don't talk about it. And that's, again, what we're trying to normalize, is to pay attention to those behaviors and know what is a flag. And I'd love to push you on that a little bit. So even in the dating front, though certainly in the context of established marriages and relationships, what are some of those red flags? And further, how is that showing up as financial abuse, in your opinion?
Yeah, I love this question, because you are correct. A lot of people don't talk about finances when they're dating. Like, it's kind of like that thing, like, we'll deal with it when we get married, but it absolutely needs to be talked about right now. One of the things is, like, when my husband and I were dating, he was like, let's go get a joint account. I was in law school. I was broke, but he had money. He was making a good job, or he had a good job, and we got a joint bank account. We immediately started talking about that, talking about goals. Like, hey, what do you see as your goals? A huge red flag is if you're dating and you guys are in college and he's like telling them how his education is much more important than your education. So we need to do whatever we can to get me through school, and then we'll deal with you. Or you need to quit school so you can work full time. Let's get me through school. That's a red flag. And luckily, the dating age is going up a little bit, so people are getting married a little bit later. So you want to be able to see, if you want to be able to finish school, and if you're in school too, like, don't give up or don't stop because it's more important to put your husband. And I apologize that I have to use these gender specific roles, but it just is what it is. Like, we're just going to call the kettle black. Like, majority of the time it's men who are, they're going into more aggressive careers. Women statistically tend to go into nursing, teaching, and because of that, it has created this patriarchal society, which dates back to when the forefathers started the country. So of where these men think, I have to be the provider, I have to be the hunter, right? We need me to get in my career. And I'm just looking at you women like, nope, we're changing that narrative right here, right now. You're just as important. You're just as needed to enter the workforce. And you don't need to be a teacher, a nurse, or, a daycare provider, even though those are very valid and very good careers to go in. But you want to be a doctor? Heck yes, we're going to support you. We're going to push you there. You want to be a lawyer? Great. Come DM me, email me. I'll be the one to, encourage you and help you realize that it is so important for women to not only go into those careers, but believe that they deserve to be there.
Well, and to your point, we did this. We did it. We had a TikTok go viral, I think yesterday. We're all very excited about it, or Instagram, where we were responding in part to this more trad wife traditional movement that is happening. And it's hard to know how true it is versus how just sensationalized people are finding it entertaining. I don't know the answer to that, but there is a lot more dialogue now that at least I'm seeing on social, for one reason or the other, about this idea that a man is a financial plan and we should go back to more traditional constructs with a woman in the home and taking care of the kids and man out there earning. And I don't know if you're seeing that or if that's showing up for you in your practice, or whether you've paid attention to some of those kinds of trends. But and this isn't my language, but the idea that a man is a financial plan, or that a woman is that any other person, is your financial plan, and you abdicate your responsibility for having that financial knowledge and partnership, whether or not you choose to stay at home or be in more traditional role in that, is okay. But know the consequences of those choices. And I think you see the consequences of those choices every single day by who comes to your office, and having to figure out at the end of the day, of course, we want to talk about kids as well, but this financial settlement that and what is fair, I would ask you that too, but a financial settlement that looks at that history of that relationship and puts, and does this, right? House, no house, business, no alimony, all of that. So talk a little bit about how that, is that the word abdication? I think maybe I'm pronouncing that wrong, but giving up, I might be making that up, but giving up that power and that knowledge is so risky, whether it be for either partner in a relationship.
Yeah. Well, especially today, I mean, anything could go. Like we can't predict or plan for all the what ifs, but there's a couple things we can plan for: death, insurance, life insurance, and we can plan divorce. And nobody's like, I didn't get married to plan for divorce. Well, but you also didn't get married to plan that your husband gets a, brain tumor with 5 young kids at home, and you're left, with 5 kids, and your husband passes away. And that's a true story. A very close friend. That's what happened in her situation. And he was the primary provider, but we don't plan for these bad things to happen. What we can, though, is what can we control for us to make sure that we are taken care of if something like that happens. And you just need to understand, like in Utah, okay, if you don't work and your husband is the primary provider, you get a divorce, you could get alimony. You could. Alimony is a shift of income from the higher earner to the low earner. But there's a couple things I'm going to tell you about. You're never going to get enough to fully live the life you were living inside the marriage. Second of all, the court's going to expect you to work. So you're going to have to go back to work and make some of that money. And then third, it terminates if you get married again. So heaven forbid you choose to not live your life and go get married again because you're stuck on needing alimony. Texas, you won't get alimony. You have to, it's very, very limited. If you do get alimony, you're going to just get half of your assets on a community property split. And if you have no assets, you're not going to get it. Florida, they just got rid of alimony, or at least lifelong alimony. And in Florida, if your husband goes to medical school, you could be on the hook for having to pay back half of those student loans. It's very, very state dependent on where you live and what will happen if you get divorced. So my thought is, and I tell all my women this, you can't even expect your husband to pay. Maybe he decides to quit his job, move to Alaska, marry somebody else, and put everything in his name. That's a true story. That happened to one of my clients. And because of that, we couldn't collect any money because he put everything in his new wife's name. So even if you get this great alimony, I can't promise you that I can get it. The only thing I can promise you is your ability to take care of yourself. So it's always good to look at your situation and make a plan. How are you going to be able to take care of yourself? And that's what we want to talk about here with what you're doing, financial literacy, and being able to stand on your own feet, to know that if the what ifs happen, I'm still going to be able to take care of myself. I'm still going to be able to take care of my family.
Yeah. And I think I had an interesting conversation. I participated in this event where I was talking about the future, was at this local Leonardo Museum, where I hosted a table conversation of the future of women, money, and power. And it was the future of education and all of this. So in that context, I talked about the feminization of wealth and trends around working. And of course, it came up just this idea of women having financial agency, whether or not they're in the workplace. And there was someone there who I would say probably represented more voices than people that spoke, but was so anti, I would say, I use the word feminism, right? So, ooh, that was, I know, just teeter up. She was not happy about that word. But this idea of financial responsibility, and she was very aggressive in saying, that's my husband. I'm choosing to be home and be a mom. I don't think women are judging me. And and he's very successful. I don't have to, work. I'm making this choice. It's this, and all feminists out there are shaming me for being at home. And I tried very hard to do a Brene Brown practice and making sure I wasn't telling myself a story about this. But I invited her into inquiry around sort of this idea of knowing what was true. And if something happened to her husband, then she would be, as a responsible parent and mother, accountable, like that story you just said, for her children. So to not know, in this case, how much money they had or have the ability, obviously if they had insurance and they had enough, then she'd probably be fine. But this idea that he will just take care of me because he loves me and because he's responsible, or oppositely, it's not always, the man or woman in that role, but it really is the importance of just having eyes wide open. And I think when it comes to divorce, people don't necessarily know what the rules are in their state, in their jurisdiction, what's true for them. And what advice in that context sort of would you give? Like, you don't want to plan for divorce. That's not what we're saying. But to have full knowledge around what is your financial circumstance if something were to happen is a whole different thing. And so tell me more about what advice do you give if you were just speaking out to women or to people about what they need to know and be prepared for in a little more detail, and including some of the basic misunderstandings people might have about what could happen if they got divorced.
Yeah. I mean, I would turn the question around that specific example of yours and just say, okay, there is nothing wrong being a stay-at-home mom. It is
Of course not.
a valuable profession. I couldn't do it. I was a stay-at-home mom for 9 months while I prepared and took the Utah bar. And I remember starting to study for the Utah bar and thinking, man, this is so nice. Like, I was excited to study because being a stay-at-home mom was just not something. But some moms nail it, and it's so important. But I would ask her this question: well, do you have life insurance on you? Your husband's doing so well. Why a $70 or $100 payment to show that your life is valued? That wouldn't matter. And then I would also ask, do you have an IRA that you guys are contributing, $7,500 in, or, whatever, a year? And I would be asking that. And most likely she'd probably say, well, no, because my husband makes all the money. And I'm thinking, well, I don't understand then why you're saying that your husband does so well. He supports you, but yet you're not investing in you and using all the benefits of you being an individual for tax purposes, at least. So I'd be asking those questions. And that's what I see a lot of is, you can be a stay-at-home mom, but are you being invested in as well? Because I'm pretty sure being a stay-at-home mom is really great, because I know how much I paid for daycare. There's a value there, right? So going one next level, I don't think that you should go talk to an attorney just because you're married and just kids. But if you guys are going through a rough patch, or if you are thinking that maybe divorce is happening, you need to go talk to an attorney in your jurisdiction, and not just like you want to find one of the best attorneys in your city, because it can change from city to city depending on what state you are. And you need to know your rights. You need to know what you can expect if a divorce is coming, and what you can do to prepare yourself or get things in line to be better equipped to protect yourself if a divorce happens.
Well, and just on that point, I was not aware that it could even vary to the degree it does within a state. And there is a question that I'm pulling from the chat for you, Jill. Does your state of legal domicile, as indicated by the IRS, cover the state where divorce will be adjudicated? And do you recommend couples at least know divorce laws in a state of residency before they commit to living in a state?
Oh my gosh. First of all, no, don't foreign shop or shop around for a state, in the thoughts that maybe we'll get divorced. Don't do that. I don't want to encourage divorce, and I don't want to encourage people moving to a state because they have better divorce laws. But to your question, does the state of legal domicile as indicated on your IRS form? No, that's not going to be where it matters. It's where you're actually personally living. So, and it's where you've lived. Most states, it's 90 days that you have to be living there for that state to have jurisdiction over you personally to be able to then go ahead and do a divorce. Now, if you have children, this is nationwide in all 50 states because this is governed by a different laws. But your children have to live in the state for at least 6 months for that state to then be able to be considered the home state for purposes of doing custody or different, parent time arrangements for your divorce. So people file in different states all the time for tax benefits. They create, businesses in different states and stuff. It's going to be where you personally reside.
But I think what shows up for me is saying, even though you don't let the tail wag the dog, let's make a scenario where you're living in a state that's very shared. Again, I don't use the legal language, like shared property, like very progressive, I would say balanced.
Community property.
Community property
is usually what you're talking about. Yeah.
But let's say things aren't going great, and all of a sudden, for one of the partners might want to move to another state, right? Knowing things are rocky, and you go, and all of a sudden you're governed by a completely different set of laws that could be less favorable. And not to say that someone would be so meditated to want to do that intentionally. I'm not saying that. But to your point, you can have very different laws that could dramatically affect the outcome of a long-term marriage based on a sudden change in location. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah. And the problem is if you have properties in the state that you've moved from, there could be an argument that wherever you just recently moved to, even if you meet the jurisdiction, is not the convenient forum because that state doesn't have any, jurisdiction over the properties. So you have to be careful about that. To be fair, don't move states to try to get a favorable divorce. It usually doesn't work. It usually backfires. My thing is if you think a divorce is possible, like you guys are going through a rough patch, my advice would be do not make any major decisions until you decide you're either all in the marriage or you're all out of the marriage.
Yeah.
If you're on that like teeter of, I don't know what we're going to happen, don't make any major decisions. Don't buy a house. Don't move your kids' schools. Just don't make major decisions that could affect. Don't quit your job and start a business. I mean, these are really big decisions that if a divorce ends up becoming imminent, becomes hugely problematic when the divorce is going forward.
Yeah, and even the complexity. I mean, I do a lot of early stage investing, so with companies that are just at the beginning, and what can happen, and I've seen happen, is that you have one of the partners start this business, then a little ways in there is a divorce, and that asset, that business, while it's growing, becomes a major issue because how do you determine valuation? How do you get payouts? If it's contentious, you got now a divorce fight in the middle of these businesses. So again, to put a financial lens or even we hope it doesn't happen, but if it does, what are the implications lens around, starting any kind of business, right? Also, you could lose your house because you're protecting your business, and because you don't have cash, like all these things, and the impact, of course, on children, if they're there, becomes so real, and it's just hard to anticipate. But to your point, these things become just major factors when it comes to actually getting a divorce that can completely derail individuals and families.
Yeah. And Jackie, I have a solution for you so that you don't have to deal with that anymore, is require your investors to have to sign a postnuptial agreement, so that the business doesn't get pulled in to a divorce if that ends up happening. And anyways, we can talk offline about that, but that's the problem, is like, major life decisions are stressful as it is. And if your marriage is in this rocky place, like you're trying to get through things, the littlest decision you made could be used against you in a divorce, and it could hurt you. So I'm always like, you need to decide if you're all in or all out. And I kind of give this advice of 6 months should be the waffle. Should be, you give yourself 6 months to do the work, to figure out if you're going to be all in or all out. You should never go beyond 6 months of a marriage on this waffle. If you've gone years thinking, I don't know if this is going to work, you need to get out. It's not going to come back to where you are, or you're just waiting for some magic to happen. So once you get all in and you're like, I'm all in again, we're going to make things work, then absolutely go make those hard decisions, work together on a business, do what you need to do. But don't do it when you're waffling. It doesn't work.
Yeah. Well, I love how you said that. And so much of your book is that, right? Like, you are not pro divorce. So you make that very clear. You're pro happiness for people and to live a fulfilled, actualized life. And what I've seen of friends that have gone through divorce, it is awful. And I'm sure, in my case, I'm probably more likely to be friendly with the woman in the divorce partnership. It's awful for everyone. And I think, just as we're starting to draw to a close with this amazing conversation, and again, we're going to post, you have a podcast, you have this book. I feel I had 14 things I wanted to get to that are highlighted. But one of your core messages is, and this is quote, divorce makes you feel so naked and vulnerable that you doubt every part of your self-worth. And you say that it's awful. It's just an awful process. There's no good divorces to some degree. But what would be your counsel advice, in a few bullet points, in terms of knowing that people will find their way through it, and how you can, if that's true for you, how to get through it with as quickly, I guess, and with as much as your whole self intact as you possibly can?
It's all perspective. When you're going through a divorce, it's like an atomic bomb's gone off, and the big, huge mushroom cloud is all around your face, and you can't see 2 inches in front of you. And sometimes you're just on the ground thinking, how am I going to get up again? And I've had a couple podcasts where they are so honest and vulnerable and real about talking about how they were just on the bathroom floor, not knowing how they're going to move forward. But I promise you, breathing comes natural. Your body will keep breathing. So that's why we talk about breathing in my book, because that's where it starts. And eventually that atomic bomb, that cloud, is going to start dissipating, and you're going to start being able to see a little bit farther in front of you. And you're going to be able to take 1 step now. And eventually you're going to take 2 steps, and you're going to keep moving forward until eventually you're going to be able to see the sun rise again. And I'm telling you, when that sun rises, it's beautiful. And there's so many people that I can tell you story after story that now are in that sunrise and in that place of peace. And yes, it feels like you're not going to get there, but I promise you, you will. And if you can just get up, start moving, move forward, and use it as an opportunity to reflect on yourself, to say, what can I do to change? What can I do to be better? You're going to be able to move into this new phase of your life a better person, ready to tackle challenges, to be stronger than you were yesterday. And you're going to be able to then be able to see that light, and you're going to be able to run to it. And you're going to look back and you think, man, I needed that trial, because look at the person I am today. That person is strong. That person is beautiful. And you couldn't have gotten there without you having to be on that floor thinking, how am I going to get through this? So you're going to be okay.
Well, and thank you for sharing that. And I love how you also talk about grief in the book, because that's a real part, not only for the couple, but for children. And what we didn't get to today, I'm mortified that we didn't, is, and especially with the financial lens and how this plays out with children, and of course, how you navigate custody, but also what a big role that money can play in that dynamic, especially if there's unequalness in terms of the lifestyles of both of the parents, post divorce. And there was an amazing woman, and I'm going to have it posted in the chat, that you interviewed with a podcast that wrote about divorce from a child's perspective, that I'm going to send that to everyone. It is, I think, Grace Casper, I think her name is, Jill. And I think that's one of your more recent podcasts. But just a minute or two about how this plays out with children. And that's a big topic to give you 1 minute to cover. But just any quick thoughts or advice when it comes to kids, and especially with the financial lens.
Just remember, there's been lots and lots of studies about kids. What we do know now is that kids need continuous, frequent contact with both parents. And kids, they lined up the most healthy, happiest kids, obviously being in a 2-parent home, in a happy, healthy home. But the second one is going to be in a divorced home with 2 good co-parents. That beats being in a together home with 2 toxic parents. So if you remember that, divorcing and then being able to elevate and be better co-parents is going to be better for your kids than being in a loveless marriage. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how much you dislike your spouse. You can be a really bad husband, a bad wife, but you can be a really good dad, a really good mom. And usually if you strip away all the anger, all the blah, that you want to be mad about your spouse, at the very bottom, you're going to realize that you and your spouse want what's best for your kids. And that's it. And if you can just get down to that commonality, hey, we got something to build on when we become better co-parents. And because of that, your kids are going to do great. Your kids know somebody that's divorced. I promise you. What they want is their parents to be healthy, to show up, and to not be angry and mean at each other. So, and Grace does amazing at telling you what you should not do as a divorced co-parent. And I love her book as well.
Yeah, I can't wait to order that one. Well, and speaking of books, thank you for taking the time to write this, Jill. I mean, you are, I mean, we're going to be friends. We're going to do more together. I'd love to do like the She Money, Jill Coil, guide, that intersection of divorce and money that could, pull in some resources and some of your wisdom in a quick, guide kind of way. But I can imagine doing more together. And your podcasts and your blog, and you're on social. You are all over the place as an authentic, heart-centered person that cares about the well-being of people and families and children. So I just want to thank you so much for the work that you do. We are so lucky to have you here in Utah, and I am imagining doing so much more together. So a big thank you. And before we just close out, just in this last minute or two, next week we're talking about money and fertility, which is also, man, that plays into even things we're talking about today in terms of that whole journey, what the implications for financially and stress on marriage. I'm actually going to try to bring that up into the conversation next week. And big news is, and I know you're going to be there, Jill, because I'm going to force you to be there. Hopefully you'll want to, is we've got the She Money Summit coming on June 6th and 7th. We're doing talks and workshops and money activations and money experiences. And our goal with what we're doing in this conversation today with Jill, but also more generally, is just normalize talking about money, making it acceptable, as you are of this movement to encourage people to talk about divorce and talk about their challenges and struggles. That applies to everything when it comes to money, because there is a financial lens to almost everything we experience as human beings. And it's not to make too much of the idea of money and finances, but just to acknowledge the role that it plays, and being mindful and bringing our attention and intention towards it is going to help out, so many aspects of our life, including having happy, healthy relationships. So on the nose, we're closing. Jill, thank you so much for joining us. And I'll look forward to seeing you in person really soon. And hey, order this book because it's really great. And thank you for writing it, Jill.
Thanks, Jackie.
Take care.
These boots are gonna walk all over you.
Thanks, Jill.